Hello and welcome to Game Theory. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Today, Keith Smith is back on the show, and we're going to dive into all of the NBA extensions that occurred earlier this week from Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, all the way through to Rudy Gobert the following night with his veteran extension. But first, let's hit the music.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Way downtown.
Bang! Bang! What's this gonna be? Wow! Are you kidding me?
Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. But if you watch the tape, what you will see completely orchestrated this game. Keith, what's going on, man?
Hey, Sam, it's the season's here. I felt like we took a little bit to get here, even with the Olympics, but it's here. I'm so excited. I woke up this morning with I have games to watch in the morning. I have box scores to pour over. It's just my happy place. I'm just so high, so excited.
It's just crazy to try and get through all of these early season games because you want to watch them all, right? And I have not caught up on everything from last night yet. I'm trying to do this thing now this year where on these nights where there are, a slate of 9 to 15 games, like a crazy number, I'm trying to limit myself to 3 or 4 that night where I just really dig into them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And pull clips for myself and really have a bunch of stuff that I can refer back to and take notes and everything like that, as opposed to before I would try and do 45 things at once and I'd have multiple screens on and everything. And I just felt like I was getting stuff, but it wasn't probably sinking in as much as I wanted it to. What is your kind of go-to strategy when it comes to watching games like that?
Yeah, so what I do is I build a schedule, and I update it month by month. Where
Good for you.
I don't have a lot of skills in life, but organization is one of them. I'm a hyper organized person. So I build a schedule. I try to make sure I see everybody roughly even, and then I update it at the end of each month because at some point, right, you're just not learning anything new about some of these teams. But I try not to go more than a couple weeks without really diving into a game, just because even at the end of the year, I want to know, Washington Wizards, Bilal Coulibaly's playing a ton down the stretch. I want to know about that, right? I want to see those players more to get a sense of as we move into the next year. I could talk about those things. It was funny because people were like, why did you know Trey Mann was playing so much for the Hornets down the stretch? Yeah. Why were you watching the Hornets? But that's why, because it ends up mattering as you move into the next season. And especially with what I do with the rosters and free agency and salary cap stuff, I just want to have a sense of where different guys are at. So that schedule is that's my life. But then I get into the night. In some of the games you just bail on, like Warriors, Trailblazers, I bailed on it pretty early on because it's oh man, this is a 40-point blowout. I don't know what we're gonna get. So but that's it. I just try to stay super organized and rigid with watching it, and then. But even last night, I got caught up in it. I was trying to watch, 7 games at once and all the madness and probably failing at it. But that's part of the joy of the next morning and the quiet when nothing else is going on. And condensed games for the win, you can whip right through them. The tools we have now, where I was talking to someone the other day who said it used to be oh, I want to watch this guy play. Then you're literally pressing the fast forward button to get through the free throws and to get through other stuff. He's now he's 3 clicks and I have every pick and roll possession the guy's ever run in his life on my screen. And it's that those things just are so helpful.
Yeah, it really is when you're trying to dive deep into something or write something like that, right? I'm just so excited that the season is here. We finally have new things to talk about. Bryce finally has new options for trivia on Sundays. We're here. We're ready to go. I couldn't be more pumped. Scheduling news here. So we have this show here with Keith. This will go up on the podcast feed basically as soon as Keith and I are done. GMAC, our fearless leader, Andrew Claudio, is going to put it up basically ASAP, right? Later on tonight, I will also go live after Denver, Oklahoma City. and we will talk through that game. We'll talk through San Antonio, Dallas. We'll talk through a couple of the games I watched last night. That will be more of me solo running through tape, diving in, and like us really trying to go into the weeds on, what teams are doing. Particularly, I know we're going to talk about Houston, Charlotte, and Detroit, Indiana, and we're probably going to talk a little bit more from Detroit side of it because new coach, a little bit more interesting to me than Indiana, if only because Indiana's team just is what it is from last year for the most part. So not as enthusiastic about diving into them deeply. I also might talk a little bit about Memphis, Utah, but that would require me to get through that game here after Keith and I are done. But that will happen probably around 1 a.m. Eastern time or whatever. By all means, stick here, but we won't put that up on the podcast feed, if only because it's going to be a lot of me like running into tape, and it's a lot more of a visual medium. That means you have to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Game Theory Podcast with Sam Vecenie. Go hit that subscribe button. Also, hit the subscribe button to all of the many social media platforms that GMAC is running. X/Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, at Game Theory Sam V. GAMETHEORYSAMV. That is your best place to get all of the great social media content for this show. Okay. Now that we've gone through all of that, Keith, from a big picture look, because we're going to go through extensions first, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about games that we saw last night and some interesting things after. From a big picture look at this extension window from the rookie's perspective first, let's go with. Is there anything that really stood out to you as a grand league-wide trend or something along those lines?
I try very hard not to, especially with things cap-wise, roster-wise, overreact to something that happens once. We are now 2 to 3-ish years into it. Used to be your max guys got done, and then you might have a couple other deals that were non-max deals get done.
Yep.
And that was it, because everybody else was, I'm not taking less than a mid-level because I'll bet on myself. And at worst, I'll have restricted free agency and I'll figure out. We're now a couple cycles into, we're now seeing deals get done that are not full max deals. We're seeing deals get done for the mid-level and less for a lot of these guys. And that's enough to me to say that's now a thing. We're going to see that happen more and more. So that's the big picture. You're always going to have your right out of the gate, July 1 max rookie scale guys that are going to get the so-called designated player language where they could make 30%. And then you're going to have a couple other guys get big deals too. But now this growing trend of, players like, making 6-7 million, maybe 12 million in a year. I think that's now very much going to be a thing we're going to see happen repeatedly because players understand this is a chance to still lock in life-changing money. And it may not be there for me next summer. So I don't know what I'm holding out on when it may actually get worse for me next summer.
So I think that in that vein, almost the most surprising deal was Moses Moody that got done, if only because Moses has struggled to find a rotation spot with the Warriors consistently throughout his 3 years there. I think Moses Moody's a really good player. I like the contract by and large. And I wonder if the point that you're referring to speaks to where the league is as a whole right now, post TV deal. I believe we talked about this last time you were on the show. My overarching theory right now is that it is really hard to sign a bad contract that will crush you later on. There are some out there. Let's not get it twisted. The Jordan Poole deal is not great.
Yeah.
There are bad deals with this new collective bargaining agreement actually really, really hurt you more than what they did previously. So the risk is heightened in many ways with these bad deals. But because the salary cap is projected to rise 10% for, let's call it at least the next 4 years, could be longer, but let's confidently call it the next 4 years, right? You answer that, please.
Oh, you know sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were just saying that. And I was kind of nodding along. Yeah. So what we have working in our models in Spot Track is kind of, we use about a 6-year horizon because contracts can't run
Sure.
longer than 6 years. So we have a 10% baked in. Now, I will say, talking to some folks in the league, there are a handful of people who are less confident that it will be 10% all the way through that 6-year window, only because the local TV money has gotten a little wonky for roughly half the league. And now you have these teams that are kind of standing up their own production things, and there may just not be the immediate return on those like what the league is hoping for, especially as we've got a handful of teams that are going over the air in their local markets, which is going to be a little harder to even return on. But so we may be, I would still say I'm pretty confident in the next 3 seasons, probably the 4th season. It's after that, but that was always kind of the window where it might get a little weird. But just for simplicity's sake, I don't think it's going to drop to like 3% or anything like that. It might go from 10 down to 8, down to 7, down to 5, but it's 10 is still fair, I think, to bake in there moving forward.
But you can still project cap rises is the point here.
Yeah,
moving forward for a substantial amount of time, which makes it more difficult to sign bad contracts right now. And that, I think, has opened up the middle class. There was a lot of talk this summer about, oh, there's no middle class in the NBA anymore. There's no this, there's no that. I think that this is where we're seeing the middle class. And I think that almost in many ways, and it's funny, we were talking about baseball very, very briefly before we went live. It does almost strike me a little bit more like what baseball teams would prefer to be able to do on some level. A lot of players end up having to get paid a little bit later in their careers, where, you know, they're already 30, already 29, and they're signing these crazy deals, 9 years, 11 years. You know, Juan Soto's contract is going to be the craziest thing we've ever seen in baseball this year. But with basketball, A, because of the shorter term deals, and B, because of the shorter window, it's 6 years before guys can get paid in baseball versus 4 years in the NBA. It allows teams to roll over a little bit more easier. That's bad English, but it allows teams to roll over a little bit easier in terms of getting guys paid earlier. And I think that the money might just end up shifting toward guys getting paid earlier. And I think we've seen that over the course of the last few years, where like the star level players that are 30 years old plus are still getting paid because they deserve it. But that's where the uncertainty really gets baked into, I think, some of these contracts, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think what we've also seen is teams are, whether it is prizing continuity because we already know the guy, we're already invested in the guy, we want to keep him, or just looking at it and saying, we may end up being, even if we're not second apron in the Celtics, Suns, Bucks, Timberwolves levels, we're probably going to be, if we're the type of team we want to be, we're probably going to be dancing around somewhere between the tax and the first apron. And it's just harder to go get a guy when you're in that spot. So if we believe, like the Warriors, Moses Moody, we think he's pretty good. We think he'll deliver right around mid-level exception value. Great. Let's just keep him versus a year from now trying to replace him with somebody with a mid-level exception we may or may not have, pending what else happens with our roster. So I think it's what you've seen is teams are a little more willing to say, all right, you know what? It doesn't have to be max or ridiculously team friendly. We can kind of go in the middle with these. And what I get what everybody said in free agency, that this past summer's free agency, we did not see a ton of guys signing the 10, 11, $12 million free agent contracts, because those guys were replaced with, they got those in extensions, whether they be rookie scale or veteran extensions. We saw a lot more teams are just getting it done that way, which leads to, instead of the movement coming through free agency, it tends to largely more happen now on the trade market right now. That's how teams are moving players around, and players are getting in different spots. So it's just a little bit of a interesting place where I think we're going to see this evolve this coming summer. There's not a lot of cap space out there because teams have already committed to so much money. So I think that changed the mindset a little bit from the player side, where, all right, if I'm Moses Moody, I'm Corey Kispert, guys who took those mid-range salaries. Yeah, who's going to give me that money next summer? That might not be there. Let me get it now. And their teams are happy to lock those guys up because, you know what, this is never going to be an untradeable contract. And if nothing else, that's a little extra I can attach to maybe one of my bigger deals. If I want to go, star hunting later on, the next summer and beyond, I've got a little bit extra money to attach onto that for guys who are very fairly paid for who they are as players. So that's where we're going to see this evolve. And I 100% believe in somewhere within a 3 or 4 year cycle, we're going to have one of those summers where it does become the cap space derby and a bunch of teams load up and go with cap space, because that's how it always goes. It always happens about every 5 or 6 years. We'll get that. So sometime we haven't had that for the last couple. Sometime in the next 3-4 years, I think that's where we'll land.
Okay. So before we dive into specifics here, let's just get a quick little advertisement here for PrizePicks. Shout out to PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. We are huge fans of PrizePicks here. We absolutely love what they do in terms of different little props that you can run, right? For instance, if you think Justin Jefferson is going to get more than 83.5 receiving yards this weekend, or if you think Patrick Mahomes is going to pass for more than 267 yards this weekend, you can do that. PrizePicks allows it. You can just end up picking that as your sports action for the weekend. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Download the app today and use the code GAMETHEORY to get at least $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is Game Theory, GAMETHEORY, to get $50 instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. Download the app today. We love PrizePicks. Run your game over at PrizePicks. Okay. The team I want to talk about first with all of this is Houston, because they've made by far the most interesting decisions here. So they signed Alperen Sengun to a 5-year, $185 million contract. They signed Jalen Green to a 3-year, $106 million contract with a player option in year 3. Okay. I loved one of these things, and I did not like one of these things, really. The Sengun one was a very interesting case of leverage in a lot of ways, in my opinion. Typically, the team holds all of the leverage in these situations because restricted free agency is very disadvantageous to the players. In this case, particularly, I think Sengun had like zero leverage if he wanted to end up getting paid and lock in money right now so he doesn't have to worry about the rest of his life. Sengun's max, and I think that we're in agreement at least, that Alperen Sengun is a 25% max player.
Yep.
For sure.
Completely
based off of who gets these contracts, based off of the fact that he's 22 years old, his production at 22 years old. He is very clearly a guy that typically would get a max. However, because he was drafted by Houston, Houston is in a situation where they could have potentially had cap space next summer if they wanted to use it, and they could have had it while keeping Sengun's cap hold, because his cap hold was so low at, I believe, $16.3 million. It is a very similar situation to what the Sixers did with Tyrese Maxey last year. That meant for Houston to agree to an extension with Sengun, they needed to get something back. There was no reason for them really to just outright hand Sengun a max at all. He ended up giving back almost $40 million in terms of what his max was. That's a substantial amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
That is real savings for them that they then will be able to use either in flexibility via the trade market or in the ability to pay their younger players, when Tari Eason and Jabari Smith come up next year, or when Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson come up in the future, it gives them more flexibility. Let's start with the Sengun side. These two things have to be taken in conjunction with one another because it does affect their overall plan. But what was your opinion on the Sengun deal from both the player and the team side?
My initial thought when I saw the 185 was what a win for the Rockets, just because it's not a max. Like that's
Right.
already, that's a win. We talked about where we think the cap's going to go. This deal is going to come in over the course of the life of it, right around 20% per year. A little bit more on the front end, a little bit less on the back end, but right around 20% of the cap. That's, great for a guy who I think will be a, potential all-star at some point in the run of this contract. Not even potential. I think in all-star consideration throughout the run of this contract. I think the fact that not only is it not a max, they didn't even have to go to like the designated player language.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have qualified for it this year. But is it
Yeah.
crazy to think Alperen Sengun could have made All NBA if the Rockets take the leap that I think a lot of people think they're going to, and if we're in a spot with Sengun where maybe it's one of those things where people are, when they're doing their voting, it's, oh, Embiid's not available, right? Because he didn't play enough games, and this guy and this guy and this guy. Now all of a sudden, even though some people are still in a spot where it's positionless, they're still kind of voting by positions for the most part, at least in the first year of that type of voting. He could have slipped in there, and then it would have been in an interesting spot to see, where does he land out with that. So those were the wins. But then when the more details came out, and it came out Sengun got the player option on the last year, I was like, okay, that swings it back some to really good for him. Because now, right when he's in his peak of his career, he can opt out. And by no means am I suggesting he's out, he's going to leave Houston. Who the heck knows? That's 5 years from now. But he'll just be in position.
He doesn't know an answer to that. Like there's no chance he has any thought on that yet.
Yeah, it is, but he'll have control. But if it's a bad situation,
Correct.
He can run away. If it's a great situation, he'll have control to be a part. And clearly, if it's a great situation, it's going to be because he's a huge part of it. So now you're in a spot where that's good. I like to think this one came in as, all right, we're negotiating, and it's Sengun's side is, we would like a max contract, please, with a player option. And the Rockets are like, we'd like a less than a max contract. And they're like, how about we do less than a max, but with a player option? It just seems like they found middle ground, and off we went. I think this is really, really good for both sides. I do kind of wonder if in 5 years, if they're going to regret giving that player option, but that's not even tomorrow's problem. That's, years from now's problems. You deal with it then.
Yeah. And like part of giving out player options here is precedent. Mm-hmm. Houston has a lot of young players that it has on this roster that will look at what they've done here for Jalen and Alperen. And I don't know if there will be an expectation, but I guarantee their agents will go in and say, look, you gave those guys a player option, give my guy a player option. Yep. Right. That's just going to happen. So that's the Alperen piece of it. I think at the end of the day, getting Alperen for a $40 million discount over the next 5 years, even if it's just like a $30 million discount over the next 4 years, is a huge win. Like you can't look at that and say it's anything else other than that for the Rockets. I did not like the Jalen Green deal. And this is not, to be clear, like I've had my questions about Jalen Green in the past. The reason I like this deal has nothing to do, it has a little bit to do with the evaluation of Jalen Green, but it's more the structure that I don't like. I don't think the structure makes any real sense for Houston. And the reason for that is most of the people you talk to around the league seem to feel in a volatile way about Jalen Green. Either he will not be like a particularly valuable player where he's inefficient and struggles to defend at a high level and everything like that. The things we've seen through the first 3 years of his career outside of the month of March last year. or all of the shot creation ability, all of the athleticism is going to pair with a real shooter at some point. Because Jalen, throughout his career, has been a wildly inconsistent shooter and a wildly inconsistent finisher. His tools say that he can be a star level playmaker on the ball. It seemed like last night, Houston is trying to lean into that a little bit. Now, I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I'm intrigued to see where Jalen Green lands this year. That is going to be a really interesting piece of it. My problem is that this contract does not give Houston any upside. Either Jalen Green is really good and you either have to pay him after 2 years or you lose him after 2 years, or Jalen Green is not great and this becomes kind of a bad contract. And I've seen some people make the case like, okay, what if he's just like the 8th best shooting guard in the league or the 9th best shooting guard in the league? The problem with that is that, did you see the market for shooting guards this summer in free agency? Teams like score only shooting guards like didn't really get valued all that much. And he's a little bit different than that because he can play on the ball and he can create and he can do some things that like certainly the Gary Trents of the world like aren't as good at and everything like that. But I am very hesitant about this deal. And if I was Houston, I don't see a reason to agree to this deal now. I would have just punted it until the summer and said, okay, we want one more year to evaluate you and see what it is. And again, like I completely get the upside of Jalen Green, but if he's really good, I'm happy to pay him at the end of the day. Because again, last summer kind of showed us that the marketplace for these guys in free agency is not like incredible. What were your thoughts on this before I kind of dig into a couple of other things?
Yeah, it's not going to make for a great show because I'm going to disagree with you. I'm pretty much on the exact same page as you are, but I'll add to it a little bit. If Jalen Green is the Jalen Green from March, this is a bad contract because you don't have him long enough. If Jalen Green is the Jalen Green that he's been every other month other than that March, this is a bad contract because he's not worth $30 million when you may have two guys coming in behind him in Thompson and Shepherd who may prove to be ultimately better fits for your team. I will say the one full saving grace here for Houston is even if this turns sour, it's short enough and he's young enough, somebody else will take it in a trade. If it goes really well, they are set up enough to, all right, we're going to have to pay him that now third contract earlier than planned, but we'll be okay because we're carrying Sengun, and by that point we'll have, if things have gone well, Smith and Eason on the books, and we'll still be okay. We're not going to be in a spot where we can't afford to do it. So that's the one kind of saving grace, but that's today. Who knows what this turns into as this roster develops and grows and they figure it all out. I would have done exactly what you said. Is I would have said, I want one more year of data. I want to be able to say, we now have 2 years of you playing, I don't know what basketball we call it, your first 2 years where you were as likely to bean a lady in the 8th row with a pass off the head as you were to throw a great dime for, a bucket. And we just kind of rolled the ball out there. Everybody ran up and down and did whatever they wanted for 82 games a year. And if we'd waited through the end of this year, now we have 2 years of you playing in a normal environment, competitive environment where you're trying to win and you're with better talent around you to help aid you in that. And we can see what you really become. And the reason why I really would have waited is there's one team right now that I project going into next summer that's going to have any kind of cap space that could really even begin to mess this up for you. And that's the Brooklyn Nets. Yes, we have to be cautious because Sean Marks, loves an offer sheet. He'll throw them out there just to kind of, hey, let's go fishing. Maybe we'll return something that we really like. And if not, we're going to force other teams to do what they need to do. But I'm not that worried about that being the guy that he's like, hey, let's go max out Jalen Green on an offer sheet. And if he did and you felt it's worth it, then you just match it and you move on. Or you don't let it get that far. You get him taken care of yourself, because the important thing people need to remember, and I get it, tampering exists. I don't get worked up over it because everybody does it. So I don't really care.
Right.
But the new rules allow you to talk to your guys way earlier than anybody else can. And you would know by the day after the finals what you want to do with Jalen Green or not. Do you want to not even let it get to restricted free agency? Great. Take care of it yourself if you feel like he's worth it. So that's where, you gave away, opposite of Sengun, where you held almost all the leverage. You gave away all of your leverage here by just saying, okay, let's just, pay him now. I don't think it's a disaster, but I just don't like it.
So two other additional things here on Green. First, one case that I had brought to me by Rockets fans was, oh, well, this just sets him up if it's 2 years where, if he's really good, he's only eligible for a 25% extension at that point after the 2 years, because from 0 years to 6 years, that is the service time window. That is a 25% max. 7 to 9 years is the 30% max window, and then 10 plus years of service time in the NBA is the 35% max window, barring, all NBA things that occur, everything like that. Here's the problem with that. If Jalen Green really breaks out and is a stud, even if he re-signs with Houston, he's still declining that third year and doing a 1+1 to get to the 30% max. If he's really good, like if he's what Houston fans think he could be down the road. That's the way that CAA, a lot of smart agents there, would handle that. You could say maybe, okay, what if he's the 8th or 9th best shooting guard in the league? Okay, maybe you do get him on a 25% max extension, but I don't know. Like that, I guess that's fine. But given who it seems somewhat unlikely to me that Jalen Green is going to be a player that is just fine. And like, he's just like a solid player. He's probably either going to be really, really good, or a guy that isn't like a minimum guy, but is like a really great, sixth man that you have come in off the bench and like get buckets in a hurry. Right. And he's shown improvement defensively. I totally get that. I thought like he had moments where he really fought and clawed last night, and he had moments where Trey Mann like kind of cooked him, for instance. During March, I thought he was better on the ball, one-on-one defensively. There's been growth there, but he still gets hit on screens. He still kind of gets drilled. There are issues with his overall team defense that drive me a little bit crazy. The second piece of this that is important is something you kind of alluded to. By signing this deal, if Jalen Green had gone to free agency, restricted free agency, the team could have signed and traded him elsewhere. But the new collective bargaining agreement is a bit more restrictive in regard to sign and trades. Having him under contract now makes him a little bit more likely. Maybe let's not say likely. It makes it easier to trade him now than it would have been it makes it easier to trade him in the summer now than what it would have been before. He still has his window where essentially he's not going to get moved before the deadline. Like, there's too many poison pill issues there. It'd be incredibly, incredibly difficult to move Jalen Green before the deadline. My guess and read on where this goes is that if Jalen Green does not like go nuts and have like a breakout season, that Houston would likely use his salary in a trade salary match situation for a star. And it then would be that they have to convince the star and they have to convince the other team. They have to hope a star comes free. They have to hope a whole lot of things happen, right? So I think that this deal makes Jalen Green more likely to be traded at some point within the next 2 years, is what I would say.
I completely agree with you. It's funny you say that too. Dan Feldman of Dunked On looked at all of the short contracts, and I think he found all of the 3-year rookie scale extensions, which there have not been a lot. There's only been like 6 or 7 of them. All but one, the player was traded. But before one of them was Kyle Kuzma before his extension even started. I mean, technically we're in that league year, but he was traded, right as he was starting the new contract. Yeah. So I'm with you. I think, if the Rockets within the next, let's say, year and a half window, if they are going star hunting, I think the Jalen Green, there's a good chance he's a part of that trade. Because just when you start doing math, you can put him and Dylan Brooks together, and that's $50 million, and that gets you a max guy if you're out there. And I get it. Maybe that has to be a 3-team trade where you route guys somewhere. Because I know instantly everybody's going to be like, oh, Kevin Durant, maybe, right? Because that was the rumor over the summer that they would chase him. Yeah, did those guys make sense for the Suns? No, maybe not. But that's where you get a third team involved and you figure it out. Yeah. But it is that's what we're looking at. Is that's where we're at with this kind of money there. But yeah, it's I don't think I'll go as far as saying 2 years from now, or I guess 3 years from now, when that player option decision is due, that he will not be a Rocket, or that will be the end of his Rockets tenure. Part of that is just, I believe in Thompson and Shepherd as players, that I think they're gonna grow into a place where the Rockets are gonna be like, we want more of a Fred VanVleet in the latter part of his career as our third guard than we want Jalen Green as a max level guy or near max level guy on our team. So we're gonna go run with the 2 kids. So yeah, it's fascinating because we haven't seen this type of deal at this level of payment very often in the league, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
So last thing here on Jalen Green, just in terms of like what his production has been to this point in his career. Per dunksandthrees.com's EPM model, which I think is the best all-in-one model. There are others out there. If people want to use other ones, like, I'm totally good with it, but I like the EPM model best personally. Jalen Green has been worth in his career 6.4 wins in 225 games. Do you know how many wins Jalen Suggs was worth last year alone?
Probably like 8 or 9. I would guess
8.2. Yeah, that is correct. That is dead on. So I think that goes to show, and I think Jalen Green's upside is higher than Jalen Suggs's, to be clear, but there's just so much less downside with the Jalen Suggs deal. Like, we know that he can be a valuable player who can be the third best player on a team that wins damn near 50 games, right? He's done that already. He's been valuable enough to do that at this point in his career. Jalen Green has been a solid player last season for half of a year, let's go with. But like, don't forget that mid-season last year, Houston was kind of taking him out of their end of game rotations at times and closing lineups because he was struggling. So, and look, like this isn't me, like, part of this is part of what Houston fans will tell you. And trust me, I've gotten into the Jalen Green wars. Steven Silas was like a catastrophic coach. I completely agree with you. I thought Steven Silas did a terrible job. I thought he did a terrible job more with Sengun than with Jalen Green personally, because I felt like he empowered Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green to kind of just go and run the show and kind of do what they wanted to do. But I will admit to the fact that I did not think Steven Silas did a particularly good job as the Houston Rockets coach. This is a big year for Jalen Green. I would have waited.
Yep.
I would have kicked the can down the road, so to speak, but we will see what happens here moving forward. Speaking of Jalen Suggs, a 5-year, $150.5 million contract, all of it guaranteed, He's just doing a 5-year contract flat with the Orlando Magic. This just felt like a very obvious move. The other note with that deal is something that I really, really liked that Orlando is doing with all of their deals. They structured this as a descending contract. So Jalen will get more of the money up front, and then the contract will descend over its latter years. What were your thoughts on the Jalen Suggs deal?
Yeah, hugely important the way they structured it. You already have Franz, same timeline, but on a max. So his will go up as Suggs' deal comes down. You're going to have Paulo a year later. He'll be on a max behind those guys. And very likely, if everything goes where it looks like it's going, that's going to be a 30% max. I think Paulo is going to be an all-NBA guy probably this year, and then that'll trigger him where he needs to be to sign that. So I think that's where we're headed with Paulo Banchero there. So what you have to do is you have to build in some ability to offset a little bit if you want to be able to continue to have flexibility to build out the roster around that trio of young guys. Now, Orlando kind of did that a little bit ahead because they've already signed a lot of their other role players, and they used their cap space this summer to get Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. But no team in the league loves a descending contract more than the Orlando Magic. The only real surprise, and I think there was some misreporting on this early, that Suggs had a team option on the final year. He doesn't. It's just straight, all fully guaranteed, but it is descending. The big question that you have with the descending contract, where the only time it can tip towards now it's too rough, is if you can't extend the player off of that final year. If it's not enough money, I think they'll be okay. I think it'll be in the range where Suggs will get paid on his next contract off of that final year. I think they're going to be all right. But yeah, I couldn't be higher on the way Orlando has built this out. They did not go for the superstar this summer. They went with another guy who just fits perfectly. And they believe and have said repeatedly, we want to have the ball in Paulo and Fran's hands, and the other guys have to orbit around them and support them versus bringing in somebody who's going to take it away from them. So I think this is a really good contract. And I see in the comments, there's a couple of questions about Suggs. Suggs he's already one of the best defensive guards in the entire league, and he's switchable because he's strong and big enough to handle the bigger wings. He is also offensively, he showed a level of playmaking ability last year that he hadn't showed in his first couple of years in the league, other than in flashes, and he shot it well. Now, that might have been a little over his head, but I think he's going to settle into being a pretty good shooter, and he just fits with the two stars there in Orlando, and that's I think they've done a wonderful job with this.
Yeah, if I'm Orlando and I'm trying to build this team out now, and I have these two wings in Franz and Paulo that are largely going to be my offensive creators, right? They're both good enough on the ball to do that. We can talk about whether like how Paulo needs to move the ball a little bit quicker and how Franz needs to shoot it more consistently. They're both so young that I think that'll come, but they're building their roster around these two guys. If I was them, I would be trying to build my roster with size kind of across the backcourt. And that's what Jalen Suggs, while not being like enormous, but he is like 6'4" let's go with. He really plays big and really can defend up and down the lineup. He gives them a ton of flexibility moving forward. Look, where he develops to offensively is going to be the key. I think right now he has ball skill in transition. He needs to take a summer, and maybe it happened this summer, like we will see. He needs to really improve his footwork out of ball screens, I think, and continue to just tighten the handle in those situations. I think he has pretty good vision. I think that he knows kind of where he needs to put the ball at times. I think he's a smart player, and I love the way that his energy just like creates transition opportunities by the nature of his presence on the court. But the next step for him is almost like on offense when he gets into half court settings, slowing down and being able to like decel and being able to have that solid footwork, play off of 2 feet instead of, playing at like the rabid pace that he always does, creating chaos everywhere. I love the chaos on offense. I love it in transition. There's just a little bit of space to kind of slow down. for him, I think.
Yeah, and I don't want to be Boston guy checking in here and comparing everything to the Celtics, but you could see the Magic are building very similar to the way Boston is built. Two big wings that are good playmakers, two guards, or really a guard group, I would say, they're just bulldogs on defense. You just unleash them, and they're super switchable. And the Magic, much like the Celtics have done, they want Wendell Carter shooting threes. They're telling him, shoot. If you're open, you better let it fly, because otherwise, what if we just want a screen setter who's going to run to the rim? We'll play Mo Wagner, we'll play Goga Batadze, we'll even play Jonathan Isaac at the 5. Just let it fly. Be that guy we all dreamed you could be. As like when the comp I remember when he was coming in was he could be like Al Horford type. Well, be that then, right? Go do that. So it's you could kind of see the elements of building it that way. And I think that's going to be really fun to watch develop. I'll also say too, one of the things I really like with Suggs, let's say we're a couple years into this deal and it's like, it just hasn't come with him as an on-ball guy. Well, then you move him off the ball and you go get a point guard then. And you figure it out if that's what you really feel like you need to do, because he can play that way. He's good enough to play in the quote unquote point guard role, especially with the playmaking wings. They're going to have the ball up. But if you really feel like we need a point guard, slide him over position as KCP, either ages out or just moves on in free agency. And I'm not going to fully write off. I don't know. I'm not saying this is going to happen. That guy could be Anthony Black. He looks much better. It is a second-year guy. Like you can just looks like a completely different player. He played really well in the game. I don't want to overreact to one game on opening night, but just saw the floor better. Took a couple no hesitation jumpers, which was really good to see. So I mean, it's my adopted hometown. I love what they're building here in Orlando. They're really just, they've gone about it the right way. They've added the right kind of guys, and this is a team that's built for this to be sustainable.
Jalen Johnson gets a 5-year, $150 million contract from the Atlanta Hawks. This is one that high upside. I think there are some floor outcomes here that could make this a bit of a concerning deal. We haven't really seen Jalen be like an impactful player in a situation where Atlanta is winning and like really, really, truly trying to contend, it feels like. His game has aspects to it that create concerning aspects, right? Not a great shooter. Defensively, he's like a real playmaker, but there are moments where he like kind of drifts a little bit off the ball. And like, I don't want to say like fully disengages, but like there are some moments where it's a little bit frustrating at times.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, please.
There's sometimes with Jalen Johnson where I was actually someone who loves this guy was like, you have to watch his recovery blocks. And I'm like, yeah, they're awesome. But half the time they're because he lost this guy in the first place.
Yeah, right.
Like he had no idea where he was. Like, cool that you made the play, but you better, because you went to sleep and got back cut. So, I guess I'd rather you recovered and blocked it. But yeah, I mean, and I'm being super nitpicky there because I do like Jalen Johnson quite a bit.
And I do too.
But there's definitely work to be done as far as, but it's, better than most, had a messy entry into the league. His time pre-NBA didn't go, I think, the way anybody really hoped it would. And then his first couple of years were just kind of, first year especially was just, who knows. Then second year started to flash, and last year was good, but then he got hurt. And just as he was really like, holy cow. But I like this one. I thought the Hawks did well, and I envision a world where in a couple years, him and Zachary Reese-Haché are kind of interchangeable wing forward types that just can do a whole bunch of different stuff. And that's what the Hawks are kind of geared around, as much as being this Trey Young centric team.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. Like, I love the idea of being able to play Reese-Haché and Jalen Johnson together. And Reese-Haché is like big, defensively solid wing who can knock down shots and can play with the ball in his hands a little bit and get up and down in transition. Jalen is a like freight train in transition. Like, that's where he like really thrives, is getting up and down the court, being aggressive in that way, cutting off the ball. It's going to come down to where the shot comes from Jalen and his overall defensive intensity. But I really think that this deal could end up looking like a steal at some point. Like Jalen Johnson has all-star upside if things really break right for him in terms of his development, or he might end up being like a, he's very different than Kyle Kuzma, like his overall game. Like it's not quite similar. Like he doesn't really fire from three. Kyle's always fired from three, regardless of what his percentages are. But like that level of player. And if he's at 30 million under this new collective bargaining agreement, you're probably okay with that at the end of the day. But he does need to showcase the improvement as a shooter, I think, to be able to get to that level. I'm interested to see what happens with Jalen. I think he's probably going to be quite good. I think he's going to end up being really solid.
I will say too, just to give everybody a sense of where we're headed, 30 million, I get it. I mean, that's a ridiculously big number, and I would love to have it, but it is that's less than 20% of the salary cap. Like that is, we're talking in the mid-teens. Totally. Is where that's headed. And this one is 30 million flat per year for each of the next 5 years. It's 30 million flat. So he is Atlanta, I think Atlanta was, I wonder if not giving him the kind of standard ascending structure, if they felt a little burned by doing that with DeAndre Hunter, whereas like, yeah, that looks like it'll probably be okay. And it's kind of turned out to be, this isn't so great. I think we'd rather not be on that, where it's, we're going to pay a little bit on the front end, but on the back end, it's not quite the descending like Jalen Suggs, but it is we feel pretty good about where this is going to give it to him flat. So I like that structure for them as well.
And this is one thing that I ended up writing about in the Jalen Green Sengun thing, but it applies to Jalen Johnson, because Jalen Johnson, the rumors were that Clutch was looking for like a max deal for Jalen Johnson. And that was kind of where they were holding the line. There's like a real pressure right now for players in representation where the real money dollar figures, not just like the percentage of the cap and like the overarching structure, the real money dollar figures that these guys are getting offered in these situations where teams realistically might be lowballing them. I don't really think the Jalen Johnson thing is a low ball, but like I think this is probably right where it should be. But there's so much pressure on these dudes. This isn't like Kevin Huerter deciding, you know what, like I'm going to accept a 4-year, $68 million deal or whatever, because I don't want to play in free agency or whatever. Like that makes, it's life-changing money, to be clear. I don't want to diminish $68 million and turning that down. But these guys are getting asked to turn down at the end of the day on extension deadline $185 million, $150 million, where you don't have to do shit the rest of your life. And that is not just like, money where I am set for the rest of my life, like the Kevin Huerter situation is. That is generational money for your families down the track at that point. Like once you get into that kind of situation where it's 185, 150, Trey Murphy at like 117 or whatever, you're basically saying like, man, like what if I get hurt? You know what I mean? Like, we don't know. Like if Alperen Sengun, like you never know, like he could have gotten hurt this year. And I don't know what that deal looks like if he gets hurt. I think somebody gives him real money, but like, I just don't know I don't know that for sure, given that he played 40, however many games last year, not 40, he played, however many games he played last year. And then, this year he gets hurt. Like, I don't know what teams will think of that necessarily in the restricted free agency marketplace.
Yeah. I want to say one thing related to that too. Yeah. This was not this group, this rookie scale group. This was a year ago's rookie scale group. I had an agent that I was talking to as it was leading into the negotiation time. And he said, the biggest thing I'm running into, and he had a few guys up, and he said, I have to tell my guys, the first thing they're going to slide to us is $100 million offer. It's not enough. And I know that sounds insane. And I know you're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's $100 million. That's 100 times a million. Like a million was more than I ever dreamed of. And now you're telling me to turn down 100 times that. And they're like, it's not enough. We have to be very there. And it's but that's where we're at in the NBA now. I mean, we are within the lifetime of this CBA. There will be a player who signs a contract that he makes $100 million a year in one of the years in that contract. And this CBA, I know it's brand new, but it's only got like 6 more years left. So sometime in the next 5-6 years, it's not going to be 100 million every year, but that'll be like year 5 of their extension, be 100 million. Jason Tatum's already at like 75 million or whatever it is in the 5th year of his, which is the current richest extension any contract anybody's ever signed. And that'll be replaced by Luka next year. So that's where we're headed. And it's just like, that's what kind of agents are a little bit battling, is everybody has to reset their mind around 100 million or 30 million in a season. It's not what it was. I just said Jalen Johnson, 30 million. That's like 16% of the salary cap. Like that's just where we're at in the NBA now. And that takes a little bit of just resetting your expectations, and then resetting it for the players and the clients, and then to tell them like, hey, this is like, I'm telling you to turn it down. But on the flip side, that's where it is hard, right? Like Jalen Johnson's all reporting, and I've heard this too, was like minutes to go that they were like 150. You good? Like, all right, let's call this into the league because we're right at the deadline, and it got done. But that's just where we're at now.
And if you're Jalen Johnson and like you really haven't like proven yourself, like even in the way that Jalen Suggs has proven himself, like I think you kind of have to do that. Even if you think you're better than Jalen Suggs as like a player and you think long-term you're going to be better, I think you have to just take that money and be like, fuck, like I'm making 150 million and I'm going to get to hit free agency again at like 27 years old or whatever. That's the other thing. Like, it's just, it's a crazy, the amount of pressure that these players are under, because teams are able to leverage this now in a real way because the real dollar figures are so high. I'm telling you guys, it's a real factor. Kind of like he said, like I've been talking to agents about this now for like months, and it is a serious, serious thing that is occurring in the marketplace. Much more so, I would say, with the rookie extension window as opposed to some of the other ones. But because a lot of the veteran guys have already been paid, but that rookie extension window is a really complicated and convoluted and stressful one for agents and players alike to try and deal with. To move forward now, Trey Murphy's the name that we just brought up. 4 years, I believe $117 million. I think
it was 112.
$112 million. That's a deal that just makes total sense to me. Trey is a player where he's like almost the antithesis of Jalen Johnson in a lot of ways to me, where, if Jalen Johnson's one side of the coin of, transition player getting up and down the court, has some defensive questions and has some shooting questions. Trey Murphy, at the very least, for a fact, is going to shoot the ever loving shit out of the ball, and he is going to defend. I think at times Trey's defensive reputation has gotten a little higher than where I'm comfortable with. I think he's a good defender. I don't think he is I think people lump him in at times with like Herb and some of these other like really high level big wing defenders in the league. He's a solid defender. He's a good defender who uses his athleticism and length really well. And that's, to me, what differentiates him from somebody like Corey Kispert, for instance, right? The other thing with Trey Murphy is that people will look at the age and say, oh, he's already 24. He's a little bit older than these guys. Like, what can you bet on? Trey Murphy, had this super late growth spurt where he went from being like kind of short, like 6'3" to 6'9". And it completely transformed his body and who he is as a player and everything like that. He, I think, just now is starting to like figure out how to grow into his frame and his body and everything like that, and how to play on the ball with that skill set. every time the Pelicans have kind of given him more usage, and he hasn't had like a ton of opportunities because they have Brandon, they have Zion, they had CJ McCollum for a long time. Now they have DeJounte, even though DeJounte is out. Like, and he's obviously did not play in their opener and he's out for a minute here as well. But every time that they've asked him to add to his game, or every time they've given him opportunity to showcase that he has more to his game, I feel like he's always shown, hey, I have some real upside here. I have the ability to put the ball on the deck a little bit. I have the ability to go and play in transition a little bit. He's never going to be like a lead guard. He's never going to be like a primary creator or anything. But there are some tools there in the same way that like Mikal Bridges had some tools to be able to continue to add to his game as a pick and roll playmaker once he got to Brooklyn. I think that this is going to look like a great deal, I think, for New Orleans as it ages. What are your thoughts, Keith?
Completely agree. I had him when I do my first spot track. I do my rookie scale projections. I had him at 5,140, which is the same 28 million AAV. He just did 4 years, which I think is honestly a win for him because they would get him back on the market a year earlier than expected. I thought the Pelicans might squeeze him a little bit just because of the games missed and the things that he's had trouble with. I think for the Pelicans side of it, you did not need to go into next summer with the uncertainty of if Brandon Ingram finishes the year with you, you've got that. Now you've got Murphy. That's two players. You got to figure all that stuff out. You still don't have a long-term center. Maybe it's Missy. We'll see. Where that goes. I know he looked good in his rookie debut, but you're still figuring some stuff out there. You just remove one of the questions and feel pretty good about this. I think with Trey Murphy, especially where eventually CJ's going to move on or transition into a bench role or something's going to happen with him. And if Ingram goes, I think you feel pretty good with, hey, 1 through 4, we line up Murray, Murphy, Jones, and Zion. We're good. We'll figure out the rest around that. It's because Murphy is, we can ask him to do a little bit more, like you said, or he's perfectly capable of being the third guy who's playing off those guys and getting open for shots and running the floor and filling lanes in transition and all the things that he does so well. He's a really good player, and I have no real issue with adding a little bit more certainty to where I'm at, knowing we've got other stuff we've got to deal with down the line. One of those being Brandon Ingram, who there's a lot of positional overlap between the two. One of them won't be there, and everything points it'll probably be Ingram. But now there's even a little bit of pressure on him now too, because his representation can't go, well, hey, you didn't sign Murphy, so you better take care of my guy. Like we're just, we're in the spot where we're going to move forward and play the game out and let it play out a little bit.
Corey Kispert signs a 4-year, 55 million, 53 million.
I think it was like 56, maybe. It's in that range. Yeah.
So somewhere in that range. This is a deal that you just do 100 times out of 100 if you're Washington. One thing that I saw was, oh my God, like why would Washington not do this deal? And then why wouldn't they trade Corey at the trade deadline? To me, if you look at a team that's rebuilding, right, like Washington is, how did the Pistons go wrong for so many years rebuilding? They went wrong, in my opinion, in part by not having good players around that accentuate their young star players that they're trying to build around, particularly in the Pistons case via shooting, right? Mm-hmm. Corey Kispert is an elite level shooter. That dude can fire the shit out of the ball into the basket. On top of it, Corey Kispert is a really, really good and solid. I don't want to say really, really good. Corey Kispert is a defensible defender. He is not a great defender, but he is bigger than you think. He is more athletic than you think. He is stronger than you think. That's a really, really, I think, good contract for Washington. And on top of it, they got a team option on the end of it, which is just like somewhat surprising to me, but I don't think it's going to matter because I think he's going to be so good that it's just a deal where you end up paying it out at $13 million.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is similar-ish to what they did with Denny Avdia, where it was,
Yeah, it
we
is.
can get him on a really good value. Great, we're going to do it. And then if it makes sense to put him in a trade, maybe that happens. But I'm with you. I don't think it's going to be how it plays out. I think Corey Kispert will be a big part of Washington. I tend to be pretty blunt with this stuff. I think people who don't watch regularly, and I get why a lot of people probably weren't watching the Wizards last year. They like, oh, he's just a white shooter, right? Like that's just the tag he gets. He's a white guy who's like 6'7" who can shoot. So white shooter can't really defend. That's like you pointed out, that's not really accurate. And he's got a little bit more, I like to say he's got a little funk to his game with the way he can change speeds a little bit. Because he is pretty strong, he can play through some contact. He improved as a passer last year. As he just had, they kind of said, hey, go explore, figure it out, because who cares? We're not winning games anyway. So if you have some turnovers, you have some turnovers, but let's try to open up your game a bit. I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star, but they didn't pay him like one. They paid him like a guy on a mid-level exception, and
it's going to be less than a mid-level like fairly soon.
End. Yep. Yeah, by next season. Which is also I've seen a handful of people point out, hey, it'll fit into the mid-level exception as a trade exception if they want to a year from now, and that's absolutely true too. But yeah, I think he's fine. I think he's a pretty good player who's going to fit. He's can grow as that team grows, and if he ends up being somebody all right, we're moving Jordan Poole finally down the line, and we're going to toss Corey Kispert in on top of it to add up the salary match. Maybe that's how that goes down. But for now, I have no issue with that contract.
We talked briefly about Moody at the top. This is just a fine deal to me.
Yeah.
I like Moses Moody as a player. It's not like we have a ton of evidence to be able to point to it. I think Moody at 3 years, 39 makes total sense to me. It's just like a bet at the end of the day. And I'm happy that they did it.
Yeah, if I'm the Warriors, my whole thing is I want to add where they landed out when they were in kind of super duper expensive world. They're part of the reason we have the second apron was everybody got paid, and then there was a whole bunch of dudes making a ton of money and a bunch of guys making none. And now we're rebalancing everything, we're resetting, and now we've got a guy in that mid-range level, and it gives them a little bit of cover if things go sideways with Jonathan Kuminga, who that could be where Sean Marks comes into play next summer, right? Kuminga didn't extend. We could see Sean Marks say, you know what? He's really good. Here's a max offer sheet. And the Warriors may be like, all right, how are we going to figure this out? But, you've got a little bit of cover there now. I think Moody's fine at that number. It'll always be tradable again if you need to move it. There's never going to be a point where anyone's going to balk at, 12, 13 million for Moses Moody. That's pretty good money. I just play him, right? Like that's my hope. I made the joke today because everything's coming out of their first game. One, it was a blowout, so it's very easy to say you'll run a 12-man rotation when you won by 100. But Steve Kerr, said, yeah, I'm going to play 12 guys every night. My running joke was, oh, now you can play 12 guys. Now you can find minutes for all 12 guys. You couldn't over the summertime, but okay. But I'm just being, salty and petty. But it's but yeah, I mean,
Boston Keith is out, baby.
That's it, man. He comes out every once in a while still. I said you took the boy out of Boston
Keith off the leash.
but you never take the Boston out of the boy fully. But yeah, I just my thing is just play him. Even when you do eventually cut down, you're not gonna play 12 guys every night. Just play Moses Moody because he's good. Yeah. Like he's actually good. Like I think he could really help them.
Real quick, Jaden Hardy, 3 years, 18 million. Totally makes sense to me. I mean, just as a flyer, it's so cheap that like, if it doesn't work out, whatever. If it does, fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine, right? It's not going to hurt you at all. If you're Dallas, that's a and if anything, you may end up with super surplus value. If he let's say he becomes your sixth man in the next year or so. Then you're set for at least a couple of years. You have to deal with it. It won't be an extendable contract because he's not making enough if he really pops. But that's fine. You deal with that down the line.
Couple of guys that did not get extensions done: Jonathan Kuminga and Josh Giddey. Last time you were on the show, I talked about the Giddey thing, and I thought that there was more leverage for Chicago than what other people thought. I am a little bit surprised that they didn't extend him regardless. because I thought that they would just do it, but they didn't. What? Any thoughts on the overall team philosophy of trading Alex Caruso for a guy that you're not going to extend at the deadline?
Yeah, my issue is, what are you doing? I guess, like, what is your plan? Because you have last night, perfect example, right? They come in, they're healthy. You're starting off the year healthy. You had, these are the guys who need the ball: Zach LaVine, Kobe
Yeah.
White, Josh
Yep.
Giddey, Ayo
Yep.
Dosunmu, Lonzo
Yep.
Ball.
Yep.
Javon Carter might as well just not, he should just stay home because he's never going to play. He's never going to see the floor again for them. And not only to mention, then you got Patrick Williams and Nick Vucevic. If you don't get him some touches, you might as well just play all guards out there and run around like crazy people at an AAU tournament. I don't understand really what your plan is here, which also kind of makes me feel better about not extending Josh Giddey, because maybe it is like, we don't really know what the plan is. So why are we going to lock into a bunch of money for a guy we don't really know what we're going to do with him yet? So that's the weird part. And then poor Modest Buzelis, who was like, well, we drafted this guy in the lottery, we better throw him in for a couple minutes. And then it was like, all right, you played your couple minutes, we'll see you tomorrow. Like, it's just such a weird roster makeup. We're not going to know anything until they make a trade or two and thin out that ball handler group. That's the only way things are going to start to come into focus at all in Chicago.
Yeah, I completely look. I haven't watched that game yet. It was funny. Trey Murphy tweeted at me to watch the game because I tweeted like has there been a rookie that looks particularly good? Because I haven't seen one yet, and he tweeted Eve Missy looks really good.
Yeah, he did look pretty good.
Yeah, and that moved immediately to the top of my list. As soon as I finish Utah Memphis, I'm gonna watch that game. So I don't have a ton of thoughts on what they looked like last night, but I mean, just the overall, the roster makeup is a mess. Yeah. Look, you can make the case that not compounding one bad decision with another is the right call. If you're not a Josh Giddey fan, I get it, but I mean, just have a plan, Boston or Chicago. Have a plan here is the key.
And if Josh Giddey, let's say it does work out that Josh Giddey has a great season, that's again another guy you could see Sean Marks saying, all right, I'll mess with them. I'll mess with a team that's in a similar spot to us as far as we're trying to get back into contention. We're trying to rebuild. I'll throw him an offer sheet and force it. And then when the Bulls match it, I'll trade for him in a year when he's trade eligible, because that's what he did with everybody else. He signed offer sheets too that got matched. He traded for all of them down the line. Been obviously being facetious there, but yeah, it's another guy. If he breaks out, I'm using that as a very relative term, but in averages, I don't know what, 15, 9, and 8. I could see Sean Marks saying, yeah, I can throw him there because they don't have anything super long-term at point guard that I think they're in love with. And yeah, I'll get the big ball handler and I'll build around that and whatever else we're coming up with here in Brooklyn, and where we draft near the top of the draft, because I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league. And we'll move forward with that. That's where, if you're Chicago, you still have control, but you ceded a little bit of that control through this process.
The two veteran extensions that got done, let's go with Aaron Gordon first. This is one that when you came on, 3 weeks ago or whatever, we talked about as being very, very likely to get done, largely because his maximum number was not overly unreasonable. Mm-hmm. And they just had no other options to replace him if they didn't end up going down this road. To me, this is just kind of a no-brainer, and they had to do it. And I love the fact that it's a huge win for Denver to be able to have him opt into that player option next year and then only do a 3-year extension off of it. I'm a little bit surprised that they were able to do that.
I was a little bit too. I thought you might see Aaron Gordon say, no, I'll do the opt out and add, 4 years on, and you're going to start me at 30 million or so in that first year. But for them to be able to do it this way is huge, because that's like a level of flexibility now that you weren't going to have otherwise. So now you've got Murray on the max, you got Jokic on the max, you got Porter wrapping up. Well, not fully, but he's got a couple years left on his max, and Gordon just gave you a little bit of a discount, which then, because he didn't do it now, the out years are cheaper too. They're going to be a little bit less. And Aaron Gordon, it just supreme role player, right? Like fits perfectly there in Denver alongside Jokic. The one thing I think has gone a little missed over the last like year and a half ish is kind of morphed into being the team's backup center too. He played about 10 to 15% of his minutes as the at the 5. So that's you're locking up kind of two positions there in a lot of ways. If like Sarge doesn't work out the way they hope, and in those over the next couple of years, now you're set. You got your power forward and that. So as much as I was critical of them for not doing what it took to keep KCP, this is a really smart move, and they got Gordon played ball and gave them a little bit of a break too.
Well, and he's the perfect guy to put between Michael Porter Jr. and Jokic, just because the defense is everywhere. He's so much of, the heart and soul of that team on the defensive end. I like last year, I kind of got shit for it, but like, I thought he was the guy that should have gotten all defense love even more than KCP. And it felt like they kind of went toward the KCP side, but Aaron is so big for them in terms of what he brings in terms of versatile defense, can guard guards, can guard bigs, can guard wings. There are very few guys who are as strong and athletic as he is that can deal with these super high level defensive matchups against great wing shot creators. He's very good at it compared to other players. And when you're a playoff team, you're a contending team, those guys have immense value.
Yeah, and he's got that mind meld with Jokic too, right? Like just where
1000%.
I mean, did so many games where it's like, oh, Jokic is taking the floater. Nope, that was a lob to Gordon, which no one saw coming but the two of them. And it's just, I mean, everybody knows Jokic and Murray are locked in. Jokic and Gordon are locked in too. I don't know. I have a belief, maybe it's stupid. I think Jokic could get me one bucket in an NBA game, just one, just one, maybe
a wide open three somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, but yeah, I'm not going crazy. It might take us 7 or 8 tries to make it happen, but that's my belief. And not really. I could never score in the NBA.
So the last one here is Rudy Gobert. He has signed a 3-year, $110 million extension. He is tearing up the player option that he has for next season in order to do this. Okay. So do we have a structure on this yet? Do we know if it's descending or ascending?
No, not yet. Haven't heard that. That's one of the things I've been hoping to find out, because this one hasn't, it's reported, but hasn't actually happened as far as we know just yet. Because now that he is declining the option just mechanically, Aaron Gordon had to get done on Monday before the start of the season because he picked up his option. Because Gobert is going to decline his, this could happen really any time now between now and the end of June. Imagine it'll probably be in the next day or so.
Right. So this could be anywhere from like $36 million flat per season. This could be $33 million next season. It could be $39 million next season. Like we just don't have and given that he's turning down $46 million for next season in order to sign this deal, I don't know necessarily where it's going to fall. And there are real reasons to go either direction on this. If you want to open up flexibility long-term, you could go descending. If you want to open up as much money as possible for next year against the tax to be able to re-sign Naz Reid or Julius Randle, it makes sense to go ascending. There are a lot of different structures that you could go here, and I'm not totally sure where exactly it'll land. Well, I'll just give you the floor here. What was your overall thought? This was, I think we even mentioned this when we did the last show, that it made sense for everybody for him to tear up that deal and extend out a little bit longer. I thought that he would even get 4 years, if I'm being completely honest. But I think that no, he won't be eligible for the over 38 at that point.
Yeah,
so he could have done 4 years.
He's a little younger than I think people. Like, I think people think he's already like 35, and I think he's like 32 or something.
He's 32 or 33. Yeah.
Yeah. This is really smart on both parties, because for Gobert, he is still going to deliver you really good rebounding and defense at the center position for the next couple of years. I know
Yep.
people, for whatever reason, this guy is like the most hated dude in the league. I never fully understood why. I think some of that is the Jazz fans were so precious with him that they turned the rest of the other 29 fan bases off him a little bit. But I think it is, I think he's really good. I think you're still going to get borderline all defense level play out of him for at least the first 2 years of this extension. The last year, we'll see. Who knows what that'll be. But I think the Wolves did really well here because you now turn that 46 million into less, no matter what the
Yep.
structure is, it's going to be less. To your point, they could have had a world where within the next year or two, you could have been like Ant and McDaniels, and that's it on your books for big money, and you could have
Yep.
really retooled. But this gives you the ability to say, all right, we've got Gobert. If Randall works out, we keep him. We can now maybe feel a little bit better about paying Naz Reid, to feel a little bit better about re-signing Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's a big part of that team, as their third guard. I think you're really in a spot where this level of flexibility is just so big for them, because this just puts them in a spot where you can feel pretty good now about this. And then for Gobert, instead of knowing I have $46 million coming to me, now he's got $100 million coming to him. And if everything had gone sideways this year and next, that may have turned into, hey, you only have 40 more million coming. And that's only 80 million total. And now it's, I got 100 million. I'm good. I can feel pretty good about that. I think we're going to see in this new world with the aprons, teams and players who are in their early to mid 30s, not bumping up against the over 38. Like, you got one more 3 or 4 year deal in them. You're going to see more willingness to, let me lock in the security of a couple extra seasons, because it's just smart. It's smart rather than hoping it's there for you later. Yeah, if you're LeBron, you're KD, and you're still super duper star, you just keep signing max deals until you don't want to. But if you're Rudy Gobert, lock in the security and go.
Well, and again, this is where the real money of the whole factor comes in. You know what I mean? Like having that real money being as high as it is, I think will convince these guys to do that. Like the name that makes all the sense in the world for this forthcoming next summer. It won't be soon, but Fred VanVleet is the name that I'm kind of tracking here. He has an enormous team option that's like $44 million next year. I would bet that ends up kind of looking like okay, let's sign like a 3-year deal for, less money, but longer term. And, I'm locking in a bunch of money here moving forward.
390 to 100. And we feel good about that, is because, again, not to round it all the way back to the Rockets, but Fred VanVleet is always going to fit. If Thompson and Shepard,
no matter what,
Green, if those guys emerge 2 of the 3 of your starters, great. Fred VanVleet becomes what he was with the Raptors for a long time, one of the best third guards in the league, because he'll play on, off ball, he'll defend either position, and you just move forward. Yeah, that's just the smart way to go about it. I'll add this too with the Wolves part of it. Because what we're kind of pricing is about 34 million at Spot Track. So that's about a 12 million decrease. That saves the Wolves somewhere in the range of about 70 to 80 million in real dollars, because of where they are with the multiplier against the tax. That can't go understated how huge that is, especially considering we've got arbitration coming up where the owners are going to be like, what is the actual money we're on the books for? So I kind of think the Gobert deal will slide in before whenever that arbitration hearing is, and we'll get done. And then
sneak that in.
That way it's already part of the part of the assets we're working on figuring out there in Minnesota.
Glenn Taylor's just like, let's sneak that in real quick. So I have a better argument here moving forward against Lauren A-Rod. No, it's or maybe it's the other way. Maybe that's what they try. Maybe they don't sneak it in before.
Maybe.
Look, the Timberwolves were slated to have $100 million tied up in Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns next season, if Gobert had picked up this player option and Towns was still on the roster. They are now slated to have $33 million in their front court, because Julius Randle has a player option that he could pick up very easily, or Naz Reid has player option, which he will not pick up. No. He is not a $15 million player. He's going to get real money. This opens them up to be able to re-sign Naz Reid. To me, is the main key. I would expect that the money that Gobert is discounting here almost is like a direct influx of money to the Nas Reed bank account in this next contract. Cause like Nas Reed should probably be around like 25 million, depending on the season that he ends up with. So, you know, right in that ballpark.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if there's a few bucks left over, you give it to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and call it good. And you kind of run it back. And I think that's okay. I think the Wolves are in a position where you're good. You have your star. You've got, that's our guy. You've got your kind of now you're just lining everything else up around him. And that's the way to do it. You just got to be really smart. They committed to a lot of money, but it just goes to show people, and I say this sometimes too, so I'm as guilty of it as everybody is, like, man, that team is super tax apron, second apron, locked into, money for forever. And it just isn't. It doesn't work that way in the NBA. No. It cycles very, very quickly, quicker than almost any other sport. The NFL is weird because you can take on dead money for, I don't know, decades, it feels like. But yeah, you just cycle it very, very quickly in the NBA. It's like a 4-year window. And then it's, all right, we screwed up. We can get out of this pretty rapidly as long as you're willing to make the right moves.
I'm going to be honest. I just like do not understand the salary cap in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't
like just the way like I've not really tried, but like I haven't really tried because it just seems immensely complicated, and I'm just like, well, maybe I'll just let people let me know what's possible on this.
As a kid, guy who's a lifelong Patriots fan back when they were the joke of the NFL through the dynasty years, I pretty much assume they're just paying Tom Brady for the rest of my life and it'll be fine. And I'm never going to question it because whatever, he gave me 20 years of fandom that I never could have imagined as a Patriots fan when I was a kid.
Okay. We got Boston Keith to come out today. It was great.
A
couple times. I'm here for it. Look, let's get you out of here with just this base level question. Any significant take that you have to get off your chest after the opening 2 nights of the NBA?
Let me double down on Boston Keith here. I think the Celtics are pretty well set up to run through the league. The fact that Joe Mazzulla came back, basically telling these guys, cool, you won. I don't care. Like, and then get them all to a man to buy into, like, we've accomplished nothing, where, we're as bad as the team that lost in 7 in the East Finals. Like, and then Kristaps Porzingis on media day is like, well, I don't really feel like I earned this ring because I wasn't part of all the playoff games when he had monster finals games. Like, I don't understand whatever Jedi mind trick they've played on these guys to convince them, and maybe with a little bit of help from outside forces that, quite frankly, I think were very overblown. But yeah, I mean, and then Missoula's like, oh, you like that we shot a bunch of 3-pointers last year? Guess what? We're gonna push the hell out of 50% shot share, and just we're gonna launch threes left and right, because I keep telling people, yes, the opening night was extreme, and I get it. They tied the NBA record. I'm not gonna be surprised if they break it this year because just the volume. They play one non-shooter, Luke Cornett, in their regular rotation, and that's it. Everybody else, if you're open, it's not only you should take it, it's you better shoot it. Otherwise, you're going to be on the bench. He is, and that's the one thing I do truly believe with him is you pass up open looks, you're not going to play. I will go to the next guy who will not pass them up, and it gets forgotten. They're still one of the best defensive teams in the league because they're just a monster defensively. The way they've built that team, it's just I don't know. I think the league is pretty open, but I think the Celtics are set up to run it back and to do what we haven't seen since the Dynasty Warriors.
I think that it's them in Oklahoma City for me, and then everybody else is kind of in a different group. That's kind of where I'm at. Just they are the 2 teams that have like real flexibility lineup wise. They're the 2 teams that can play 5 out, but also defend on the perimeter and do all sorts of things that really matter in the modern NBA. The sneaky thing about Cornette, do you know that like Luke Cornett at Vanderbilt?
Yeah, he was a shooter.
He took almost 500 threes in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's
the
why
whole thing with Luke Cornett.
He was the Unicornet in New York, right? They called him the Unicornet because he took all those 3-pointers, and now he doesn't take. He actually talked about it in the preseason because they were like, why don't you shoot threes? And he talked about he had some injuries, I guess, with his shoulder and his back, and it's caught it. He's like, my form's just not really there anymore to do that. So it's just, every other big is like, nope, I now play 35 feet from the hoop. Luke Cornett's like, I used to do that. I'm going the other way just to be, and I wouldn't be even surprised if it was because he's such a weird, wacky dude. He's like, I'm just going to go the other way with it. Like he's like they're like modern day, like Bill Walton goofball on the team that everybody loves. So there's something, but now it's funny. Now that I'm gassing them up, they'll probably lose to Washington tonight and send the whole fan base in a complete and utter panic. That's just, that tends to be how these things go.
That'd be absolutely amazing if they lose to Washington.
Oh
tonight.
my God. It's for you, not for my Twitter mentions.
Like it'd just be so absurd and ridiculous. This Washington team is it's something. Okay. Yeah. Keith, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people about Front Office Show and Spot Track.
Yeah, Front Office Show. Our show, Trevor Lane and I, every day, Monday through Friday. We do our show, a lot of catching up on the news and the notes around the league. Every Friday afternoon is a live show where we take a bunch of questions. We call it Front Office Friday. We have a lot of fun. It gets weird. It gets goofy. We have a great time with that. It's your show as fans of the show to ask us questions and let us go from there. We're trying out something new on select nights. We're calling it Front Office Overtime, where we go live at the end of the night. So around like 1 a.m. Eastern or so, and just talk about what we saw in the games, because we don't do a lot of game breakdown stuff. And we did it last night. We actually, funny enough, went live and then got an overtime game with the Suns and Clippers. And we had a lot of fun doing that last night. Then you can find my written work if you like roster cap related stuff over at Spot Track. I've got a lot of stuff out there. I have a piece I wrote about kind of the opening night financials of the league. Who are the apron teams? Who are the tax teams? Who has open roster spots? What does that mean for all those teams and their flexibility as the season opens up? And then a piece I spent a lot of time researching, talking, having a lot of conversations with front offices, agents, players about is we called it the NBA's vanishing 15th roster spot, as teams have become less likely to fill that 15th spot. And it got a lot of really good quotes, I felt like, from all sides on that. It's, but spoiler, agents and players don't really love it. And teams are like, calm down. It's the 15th spot. It doesn't, it's not the end of the world, but it is something that factors in. And I wrote a lot about why this matters, why this may have come to being because of two-way contracts and some of the tax implications and like. But if people are interested in that, check that out.
Go follow Keith's work. He's the best. Go subscribe to all of the social media channels and the YouTube channel, Game Theory Podcast with Sam Vecenie. Go hit all of the many, many social media platforms. X/Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Game Theory Sam V is your account tag there. By the way, Keith, do you have the Boston game on?
I do.
Jordan Poole is he's having a pool party right now against Boston.
Doing it. 11 points in 5 minutes.
Let's just go crazy.
I told you. I haven't looked at Twitter yet. I'm sure Celtics fans are being completely and utterly rational about it.
Very normal. Very normal. Shout out to the folks over at PrizePicks. Use that code Game Theory to go sign up and download the app. We will be back on the YouTube channel after these games end tonight, particularly after Oklahoma City, Denver. That is a game that I will be tracking very closely. I will also be tracking Dallas and San Antonio very, very closely. We'll break down some tape. We'll talk about everything that kind of went on, and we'll break down some things from the earlier games I mentioned as well. Go to The Athletic. CJ Moore and I will have college basketball top 25 soon. I wrote about Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green earlier this week. A lot of fun stuff. So go over there, subscribe, keep me employed over there. Until next time, we'll talk soon.